Good morning. It's great to be here in Atlanta with all of you. My name is Peter Samuelson. I'm one of the board members of the American Conservative Union. Dan asked me to interview Congressman Hice about conservative principles and effective solutions. We hear a lot about the swamp, and we've got a resident of the swamp here to join us, an expert, someone who can share some real-life insights. But let's start with you personally. You went to Asbury College. My dad went to Asbury as well. You became a Baptist preacher for 25 years. How did you become a preacher? What led you there? What led you to Asbury? Tell us about those early decisions.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you all for all that you do. I cannot tell you what an honor it is to be with like-minded people who are in the fight with us. So thank you, and thanks for all that you do at ACU. What a great organization. Thank you. But yeah, you know, people ask me all the time, what does a pastor know? I was a pastor for 25 years. What does a pastor know about politics? And I just basically say, you obviously have never been part of a Baptist church. You know, I felt like I was up for re-election every week for 25 years sometimes. But, you know, listen, my story really is one of those that was unintentional. I never dreamed that I would be in politics, never dreamed that I would be in Congress. I'd been very involved in helping people get elected throughout the years, but I never anticipated that I myself would be involved. But we had a couple of redefining battles that came our way, one with the ACLU. The ACLU sued the county where I was pastoring over a copy of the Ten Commandments in the courthouse. And just so happened that our church put those commandments in the courthouse. And so literally when the ACLU sued, that lawsuit marched right in the doors of our church. And so for the first time in my life, I went before the county commissioners and I urged them. I looked every one of them, I'll never forget, looked every one of them in the eye and said, if you will fight the ACLU, I'll pay for this so that it doesn't cost the taxpayers a dime. But the deal is you got to fight and you can't cave. And they all kind of looked at each other and said, that sounds pretty good. All in favor, say aye. And they voted. And I had no idea what I just stepped in, y'all. It literally was a life-transforming time. But the short of it, 2 years went by. We lost the case, raised several $100,000 for the case. The commandments had to come out. At that point, we changed our focus to the state of Georgia. And for another 6 years, we're involved in battles in the state legislature. In 2012, I was honored to be in Governor Deal's office as he signed a law that a 9-document historical display, which includes the Ten Commandments, are legal in any government building in the state of Georgia. So it went right back up in Barrow County. That display, in fact, is in the Capitol in Atlanta. If you go down in the basement, the mole hole, they call it, you'll see those 9 documents there in my office in D.C. And so that started it. And then one other battle with ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom. They contacted me and asked if I'd be willing to challenge the IRS and specifically the code, the Johnson Amendment, that restricts what can and cannot be said in churches with threat of potentially losing your tax-exempt status if you cross certain political lines. And so I immediately jumped on that. There were 33 of us across the country, 33 pastors that joined that first challenge to the IRS. And basically, I kind of became the face of that battle as well. And I'll never forget, in our church on that Sunday morning, every media presence you can think of was present in the church, all of them. Nancy Pelosi's daughter was there. She was doing a documentary for HBO, and all of them were there. And I had 2 candidates who were running for president. I dealt with where they stood on life, where they stood on marriage, dealt with it from a biblical perspective, and then urged our church family to vote for this candidate and urged them not to vote for this one. And lights and clicks and everything went all over the place. But the bottom line is this. The next day, I sent a copy of that sermon to the IRS along with a letter. And in the letter basically said, here's what I did. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I believe your IRS code is unconstitutional, and I challenge you to come after me. The other pastors did something similar, and the IRS did not respond. So with ADF, we all got together and said, let's do it again. And the second time, there were about 168 churches across the country participating. Again, still no response from the IRS. So that actually has turned into an annual event now, Pulpit Freedom Sunday. Some of you are aware of it. Thousands of churches participate. And still, there's been no response from the IRS. But that was one of the things that projected me to get involved in Congress. A radio program came out of all those types of things. I ended up being on the radio every day on some 400 stations. But our congressman retired, John Linder, and we had people start asking, would you consider running for Congress? And so that's really how it all started for me. I had no intentions of being here, but one battle followed by another battle kind of opened the doors, and God redirected our life, and that's where we are now. Honored to be on the front line in D.C.
What a great story of defending religious freedom. Well, religious freedom certainly is at one of the core principles of American freedom. We hear a lot about making America great again, and before we talk about the swamp and the negative parts, let's talk about the positive parts. What is it in your mind that makes America great? What are the principles that we need to keep in mind and advance and defend?
Oh, there's no question. The limited government, maximum freedom. If we're going to just summarize it in that, and you know, the only way that is possible is for the only way you can have limited government is when you have people who are able to self-govern their own lives. Right? That's what our founders gave us. That's why, beginning with George Washington, our founders laid down the reality that religion and morality are indispensable parts of this whole American experiment. And John Adams comes along and said our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people. It's not going to work with any other. And so it is impossible to have limited government if you have people who are incapable of governing their own lives. It's impossible in a secular society to have limited government, because the only way it can be limited is if people behave and they treat one another respectfully and that type of thing. So that's why religious liberty is so important to me. But, you know, what makes America great is the fact that we have, for nearly 250 years approaching it, we have been able to maintain limited government and maximum freedom. And now we are in the fight of our life to keep that. And that is... that's why every one of you are involved. That's why I'm involved.
So we believe limited government, maximum freedom is what makes America great. Obviously, there's a lot of people in D.C. who have a different vision for what makes America or could make America great. How do you describe their vision, and why are they so confused?
Hey, we're on two totally different worldviews that are involved. I never would have anticipated, and I don't think anyone in this room, even 10 years ago, would have ever imagined that we would legitimately, authentically, realistically be in a fight against socialism in this country. But that is what we are up against. There is a movement, a mentality to have the government literally take over every aspect of our lives. And you cannot get any more un-American than that. And yet that is indeed the battle that we're facing. And what alarms me is that those representatives in Washington are nothing but a reflection of the districts from which they come from. These districts are electing these people who share those districts' worldviews, and they want those people representing them in Washington. And that is the alarming part to me, that, you know, we've always had communists. There's always have been socialists in D.C., but now they are in your face. They are wide open. We see it on television across the country. This is a serious enemy to American principles that we're up against. And literally, when I say we're in the fight of our life, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, folks. This is no time for us to be throwing in the towel. This is a time for us to dig deep and to give it everything we've got. There's too much at stake. This country is too valuable for us to lose this battle. We cannot lose this battle that we're engaged in right now.
Totally agree. We cannot lose this battle. I find it so puzzling we're in this battle. Like you said, never would have imagined we would be fighting socialism in our lifetimes, right? It's a strange thing after growing up with the USSR to find that once again socialism is attractive to so many people. How is it that people who grow up in America with freedom don't understand that and become entranced by socialism? What happens that our neighbors and our friends just lose their way and find their way attracted to that?
Well, listen, I mean, it starts across, there are multifaceted answers to that. I mean, we have the breakdown of the family, we've got breakdown of our culture, but we have an educational system that long ago has discontinued teaching American exceptionalism and the horrors of socialism and other systems of government around the world that we now find ourselves fighting against. And so as a result, you stop teaching those principles over a course. You know, we all know we're only one generation from losing freedom, right? We know that, and we are watching it. When you remove an educational system, when I was a kid, we used to have everything from prayer in school to having the Pledge of Allegiance and being taught about everything from the Pilgrims to our founders and our principles. What made America great, the reason we went to various wars, the victories in having those battles won, and those things these days aren't being taught. And, you know, I know I personally co-sponsored a bill to eradicate the Department of Education in this country. I believe it needs to take place in the state and local levels, but I think largely you start teaching socialistic principles, you start having Hollywood cram those things down our throat, and media pushing it down our throats. After a while, it starts influencing an entire generation.
Well, principles are a great thing, but we go to D.C. and we look at D.C. and we see a swamp. And we see a lot of failures and a lot of lack of effectiveness. So let's talk about the swamp. We elect good people who go to D.C., and after 5 or 10 or 15 years, they're not always such good people anymore for the conservative movement. How does that happen? What happens to a person who goes to D.C.?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. And listen, I've seen it now over and over. I'm in my third term, and I know what I experienced personally, the conversations that were given to me, and I've seen those same conversations with many other representatives as they're elected. But basically, it goes like this. You get elected right out of the gate. Your first week, 2 weeks in Congress, people start pulling you aside, congratulating you on a great win and all this kind of stuff, buttering you up with those kinds of platitudes. And then the conversation starts shifting to something along the lines of, we know that you're here because you want to make a difference. We're all here, we want to make a difference. You want to have an influence up here, so you want to get on the right committees. You want to get on the kind of committees that's going to move the needle, move the ball forward. And then the conversation shifts to how you get on those committees. And ends up, you've got to basically surrender your voting card to the way they want you to vote, and start giving your money to allow leadership to spend your money to get elected the type of people who they want to get elected. So it all comes down to your voting card and your money. And if you don't provide both of those, then you don't get the committee assignments that you want. You don't have the opportunity for bills that you want to present to the floor, of having a chance for those bills to even be voted on. And so the things that you are there to try to accomplish are taken away. And then they start taking away funding from PACs. And listen, I was not there for 3 months. And they were running ads against me in my district on the radio because they didn't like the way I was voting. I was not there for 3 months, and ads were being run against me coming from really basically from our own leadership. And it's that's the way they do it. And you know, I've seen people one after another after a while begin to cave to that kind of pressure and buy into the falsehood that the only way to have influence is to surrender your money and your voting card. And I did not do that. Of course, people, some of my closest friends in the Freedom Caucus, they didn't do that. And now we see just that group alone has tremendous influence within our own party and beyond. So, but that's kind of the way it goes down, and people tend to surrender.
It's hard to fight against that kind of pressure. Who do you view as a role model? Someone, one or two people who have done a great job of resisting that pressure and standing up, either today or from the past?
Listen, well, today there's no question two of my closest friends and greatest leaders in Washington, D.C. are Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows. They have been champions for conservative principles. They both have taken tremendous heat. They've been the target and the bullseye of all sorts of shots, and they have stood in the gap, and they've developed the Freedom Caucus, and now there's a group of more or less 40 who are absolute warriors who are not there to get reelected, but who are there to move the needle and to take our country back and stand for conservative principles. And I cannot express enough gratitude to them for the way that they have stood and the way that they have helped develop the Freedom Caucus to become the influential group that it is today.
Excellent. Let's talk about moving the needle. There's a lot of pressure to do things that lead to failure, maybe to grandstanding without following through. As a congressman, what do you do? How do you think about being effective? What are the secrets to actually resisting all that pressure or getting beyond it, overcoming it, and being effective?
Well, for me personally, there's a couple of things. Obviously, my faith is the most important thing in my life, and so I stay in my office. Thank you. I live in my office. I pull out a cot every night and literally sleep there in the office. A cleaning crew comes at 5 a.m., so I'm up at 4:45 every morning, run down, get a shower. I come back to the office, and then I have my quiet time. I spend some time in the Word, spend some time praying, spend some time getting my heart ready for the battle, and then it's like, God, let's run. Let's go for it. And so that is my foundation, and that is really what keeps me focused and keeps me energized and courageous to run for the battle. But, beyond that, it's important for you to understand, and, I knew this up here, but I didn't really understand the significance of it till I got there. As a member of Congress, I am less than 1/4%. And yet everybody expects you to go up there and change Washington, right? But the odds are not real good. So you got to have 218 votes to get anything passed in the House. So in order to move the needle, obviously it takes a coalition. It takes people who are behind you and willing to stand for whatever it is you're standing for. So you've got to develop relationships and you've got to develop a coalition. And I have found no better group of people to stand with than those who are members of the House Freedom Caucus, as I've already expressed several times. But I can't say it enough. There's just strength there in having a group of people who are willing to take the arrows in order to stand for principle. And once that reality genuinely became known to leadership, then all of a sudden they knew that they couldn't pass stuff without us. And although we were still relatively small in numbers, we were enough of a coalition that they needed us to get the ball across the finish line. And that has just been an invaluable tool. And as you all well know, the president loves the Freedom Caucus. He calls us the Freedom Guys. He said, "How are the Freedom Guys doing?" And the relationship that the caucus has with the president has just been amazing. But you must have groups, individuals, in order to move the needle. And I have found personally that group of individuals is the strongest and most influential group to help accomplish that. Even interestingly, and I never would have dreamed this, and I really don't know where this is going to go, but to this day, we are even having Democrats with all the radical stuff that they are throwing out there coming to Freedom Caucus folks saying, "Listen, we know we got to have y'all. We got to how can we work together to get some stuff done?" And I don't know where this is going, but it's interesting that even those on the far left are recognizing the influence of the Freedom Caucus and coming to say how are we going to move the needle? We need some help.
That's fantastic. You're working every day to move the needle. What are you working on specifically? What do you want to accomplish in the next year or two? What are you going to actually get done?
You know, I personally, as I shared a little bit of my story a little while ago, I believe that we live in the greatest country in the world. But one of the reasons for that is our entire system of government does not work without we the people being involved in it. Our whole system is about us being a voice and getting involved. And I am deeply committed and convinced, convicted of the reality that we need the American people. We need the faith community in particular to step up. Things like life. We could permanently do away with abortion if those in the faith community would just go vote for pro-life individuals. I mean, and so, you know, for me personally, one of the biggest issues was to repeal the Johnson Amendment. The president said he would do so. We have worked like crazy to try to get that. We twice now have gotten that repeal through the House, but we have yet to be able to get it through the Senate, so it has not gone anywhere. I'll continue fighting for that. And there's a host of other things, Peter, that I could share with you that we're talking, that we would love to deal with, from fiscal responsibility to defending our borders, to health care. I mean, there's so many things we're working on. But the reality is, as long as the Democrats have the majority of the House, my number one goal is to take back the majority. That is what I am 100% focused on right now. The reality is, in the House, it's mob rule. You have to understand this. Whoever is in the majority in the House does whatever they want to do, and there is nothing you can do to stop them. Now, we can try to throw in a wrench, we can try to slow it down, we can use procedures to mess things up, but at the end of the day, the House majority does whatever they want to do. And fortunately, we have control of the Senate now, and they are helpful. But number one focus, we got to take back the House. We got to keep the majority.
So we have a lot of members of We the People right here today. Activists, concerned individuals, maybe some of your constituents even. What can we do as individuals out in the communities to make your life better and to help you be more effective?
Thank you for that. Number one, pray for those of you who believe in prayer. I believe at the heart of it all, we're facing a spiritual crisis in this country. The more we kick God out of the public square, the worse shape we're in. We need to get back to the spiritual principles that we have forsaken. So number one, pray. Secondly, I would say, hold your representatives accountable. And that goes from the local school district to your city council, your county commission, your state elected officers, your representatives. I think it was Ronald Reagan who made the statement that until they feel the heat, they don't see the light. And so it's time that we put the heat of accountability on all of our representatives, and then get them elected. The ones who are going to stand for truth, we got to get them elected, and then hold them accountable to do what they said they were going to do once they got there. And so, listen, that is it. People, please know, letters matter, phone calls matter, getting grassroots involvement, all of these things matter. Again, I just say it again, our system of government does not work without we, the people, being involved and engaged. And so every way along those lines, it all matters. It matters deeply. And thank you that y'all get it and that you are involved on all these things. Keep it up and get some more people to join you.
In terms of getting more people to join you, I bet a lot of people here attend churches that aren't as engaged in the battle as they would like them to be. You were in a church, you got it engaged. Any advice on how they can get their churches and congregations engaged in the battle?
Yeah, listen, many pastors, fathers, rectors, are scared to get engaged. Many of them believe, have bought into this erroneous mentality that separation of church and state means I'm not supposed to deal with these things from the pulpit. Listen, I violently, if I can use that word, disagree. Nothing could be further from the truth. We would not have a nation had it not been for the pulpits of this country blazing the trail of freedom and liberty and charging forward with that. And the First Amendment, obviously, the heart of that is religious freedom, and the epicenter, the centerpiece of religious liberty is in the pulpits across this country. And for government to be coming in trying to censor what can and cannot be said from the pulpits is just unthinkable. Nonetheless, many of you probably have church leaders who are scared to get involved. That's okay. Develop groups of individuals within your church who understand it and still get a movement within your church or parish to get involved, to help people understand what's at stake, get them registered to vote, pass out voter registration material. You can do that. Pass out information of the differences between candidates. Help register people in your churches to vote and help get them out to vote with an understanding of who they're voting for. You can do that. There is nothing wrong with it. And then keep helping us any way you can to repeal the Johnson Amendment. We've got to liberate churches across this country to speak truth to their parishioners as to what's happening in our country and how we need to engage it.
Congressman, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing.
So much,
it's been
Peter.
a pleasure.
It's my honor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.